It's time for Fresh Oil with singer-songwriter and pastor Keith Manley. A program designed to minister the gospel of God's grace and to bring fresh oil to the brokenhearted. And now, with today's program, Pastor Keith Manley.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Fresh Oil. I'm your host, Keith Manley, and it's been a great week. I'm talking about a subject that all of us find ourselves facing at one time or another, and that is when we get spiritually exhausted, when we get burned out, when we experience what I call soul fatigue. We've been using the prophet Elijah as our example. The story's found in 1 Kings chapter 19. Elijah burns out after having the greatest victory he would ever have in his life as he called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel. He defeats all the prophets of Baal. He brings revival back to Israel. The people are turning their hearts back to God. But Jezebel rises up against him, and he gets afraid, and he takes off running. And you know the story. He winds up under a broom tree, and he says, God, I've had enough. Just kill me. And he falls asleep in his exhaustion. He literally outran a chariot on the way back to the palace. But now he finds himself exhausted, and he falls asleep. And God led him on a journey to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And it's there that Elijah is going to encounter something so surprising. He was looking for power, but instead God gave him something called presence. The God who comes quietly. Today on Fresh Oil, I want to talk to you about the whisper in the wind. See, Elijah goes to the cave and he's waiting for God to pass by. And the Bible tells us that first came a mighty wind, but the Lord was not in the wind. And then there came an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then there came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And then the Bible says, and then came a gentle whisper. And that's where Elijah heard God, was in the gentle whisper. And this is what the Bible says in 1 Kings 19. Let me read verses 11 and 12. So he said, Go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord was passing by. And a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire a sound of a gentle blowing. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? Now, I often wonder with this story, why did God come to him in a whisper? I mean, God is all-powerful. He could have been in the earthquake. He could have been in the fire. But instead, he came in that gentle, soft whisper. Many times when we find ourselves burned out and exhausted, we are looking for the thunder, we're looking for the fire, and we miss God because we're not listening for that still small voice that speaks inside of every one of our hearts. See, a whisper draws you close. It doesn't impress your senses like the earthquake or the fire, but it touches your soul. We expect big, but God often moves small. When we're weary, we want some kind of a dramatic intervention. We want thunderclaps and visions and instant deliverance. But more often than anything else, God offers stillness. He gives peace instead of performance. He reminds us that His voice isn't always loud, but it's always near. See, that whisper was not weakness. It was intimacy. God speaks to Elijah, and Elijah begins to give God all his list of what he's done for him. I've been very zealous for you, Lord. I've done all these things for you, God. See, Elijah was caught up in that trap of performance, where we relate to God based on our performance instead of our relationship. We live in a noisy world. And sometimes I think we have to relearn stillness. Quiet can be something strange for us in this noisy world. notifications that pop up, Facebook, Messenger, all these things that happen, news cycles, emails, expectations, it never stops. And that constant noise can oftentimes drown out the voice of God. In our society's quest to be connected, it has disconnected us from God. And that's why silence is not just helpful, it's holy. You see, friends, stillness will train your soul to listen again. It pulls you out of reaction and into relationship. Elijah heard the thunder, he felt the earthquake, but finally he listened for the still small voice where God was speaking to him. You see, Psalm 46:10, it doesn't say strive and know that I'm God. What does it say? Be still and know that I'm God. Stillness is not just a pause in the chaos and the noise, but it's the place where clarity returns and you can hear God again. Maybe today you feel disconnected, and you might be wondering, why does God feel so distant? Perhaps you haven't lost him, you just stopped listening. And the only way back is not to run harder, it's to get quiet. Not so much the performative prayer, but just honest silence in the presence of God. Not noise-filled worship, but still surrender with an open heart before your God. Not spiritual duty, but spiritual intimacy. There is a difference. See, the whisper still speaks. God still speaks today in that quiet voice. Not in the fire, not in the thunder, but in the still small voice that reminds you, you are mine. You are not alone. I see you. I'm still here. That's what God did for Elijah. Does silence make you uncomfortable? Oh, friend, if you're going to hear the voice of God, you have to have that quiet time. The time where everything is still, where the phone is turned off. Maybe God is inviting you today to draw closer to him and in stillness rather than busyness. When was the last time you truly listened and not just talked to God? We can find God and his presence in the stillness. And secondly, today, I want to talk to you about naming the wounds. The wounds that caused you to be burned out. The wounds that caused you to drift away from God. See, you can't heal what you won't name, what you won't acknowledge. Spiritual burnout, it's often rooted in unacknowledged pain. Some losses that we've just minimized, disappointments that we buried, and wounds that we kept hidden behind polite Christian smiles. But unhealed pain doesn't just disappear. It leaks. It festers. And over time, it silently drains the soul. See, I really believe the Bible tells us the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And sometimes people ask me, Pastor Keith, how do I know if my heart is broken? And I say, like anything else, the heart is a vessel. And when a vessel is broken, it leaks. When your heart is broken, you leak tears. When your heart is broken, you lay in bed at night and you can't shut down the thoughts that are going through your mind. See, eventually, the soul doesn't shut down because we're weak. It shuts down because we've refused to listen. Many of us try to treat exhaustion by adjusting our schedule or cutting back on our responsibilities, and while that can really help, soul fatigue runs much deeper than just a crowded calendar. Maybe it's a grief that you never processed. You lost a loved one. You went through a divorce. Something happened on your job. Maybe it's a betrayal that you've never spoken about. Maybe it's silent shame or regret that you've never brought into the light, addiction that has kept you bound. Maybe it's ministry wounds that you didn't even know you were allowed to grieve. See, we carry spiritual injuries like soldiers carry invisible scars. We learn to function through the pain, to press on and keep smiling. But eventually the soul just stops pretending, and you don't just need a break, you need a healing. And healing begins with honesty. I love the book of Psalms because it's filled with honest prayers of the weary. David said in Psalm 42, verse 5, he says, "Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me?" Now, let me tell you what the soul is. The soul is your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions. And to the Hebrews, it was also their memories. Mary treasured up all these things in her heart when she spoke about the Lord. And in Psalm 13, David said this. He said, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" Those aren't clean prayers. They're desperate prayers. They're unpolished. They're honest. And guess what? God doesn't rebuke them. He records them. God is not intimidated by your questions. He's not offended by your sadness. He's not even tired of hearing you say, "I'm tired." He invites you to come into his presence and get connected with him. See, the soul finds rest not by pretending that everything's okay, but by bringing everything into the presence of the one who already knows. You remember in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve sinned against God, and God knew it because he knows the end from the beginning, but he comes down in the cool of the day to walk, and he says, "Adam, Adam, where are you?" And there was Adam hiding from God when God already knew he failed. In John chapter 5, Jesus meets a man who had been sick for 38 years. Imagine that. And instead of immediately healing him, Jesus asked a surprising question. This is what he said. He said, "Do you want to be made well?" Now, it wasn't a cruel question, but it was a revealing one, because sometimes we get so used to our brokenness that we stop hoping for healing and for God to change our life. We get numb, and we carry pain that God never intended for us to carry alone. But Jesus never avoids wounded people. He moves toward them. He touched the lepers. He forgave failures like the woman at the well. He restored the dignity of the brokenhearted. And he's still doing it today, my friend. The great physician doesn't rush healing. He meets us in the process. Now you say, "Keith, how do I begin naming my wounds?" You don't need to bleed in front of everyone, but you do need a place to be honest. Create space for stillness. Soul wounds surface when we slow down enough to feel them. And I invite you to journal your pain. I did. A time in my life when I was so depressed. I went through such a bout of depression, and God spoke to me and told me to begin journaling. And I would write down every day how I felt and what I was going through, and I would number my day on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. Most of my days were very small numbers, but it wasn't long till God began to meet me in my pain, and he healed my heart. And then find someone you can speak with who's safe, a pastor, a counselor, a friend, someone that can walk you towards healing in your life. And then, friend, bring it to God into prayer. Honest, messy, silent, tearful prayer, the kind that Jesus welcomes. And then finally, let God carry it. You weren't made to carry that pain alone. Lay it down at the cross. Thanks for joining me today. Walking Grace.
If you enjoy the ministry of Fresh Oil, we invite you to check out Keith's books, which are available on Amazon.com. Keith has a memoir entitled, "This Is My Story." In this book, he shares personal stories of divine encounters, answered prayers, as well as the battles he has faced as a pastor. Keith's book, Christ in the Seven Feasts of Israel, shares a picture of Jesus the Messiah, found in the ancient feast days God gave to Israel to celebrate. His book, The Grace Revolution, which Keith recently taught on Fresh Oil, is also available in paperback, hardcover, and the Kindle ebook. For more information, go to Amazon.com and search Keith Manley Books.
Thanks for joining us today for Fresh Oil with Pastor Keith Manley. Fresh Oil is an outreach of Grace Family Church in Rockford, Illinois, and can be heard each weekday at this same time. You can reach us online at weneedgod.com. Until next time, remember, God's love for you is unconditional, and He makes His mercies new every morning.